Welcome to today's episode brought to you by AMC Insights. My name is Khurram, and we're going to be talking about how exactly AI and consumer shifts are rewriting all the rules of branding. Now, we already know that branding is all about creating meaningful connections. But because of the rise of AI, and the change in the way that consumers expect things. And alongside that, the cultural diversity that's happening and changing the way that global markets work. And that requires such brands to actually build even more trust and loyalty than ever before. So, to unpack these changes and to explore what exactly is going to happen with the future of branding, we're going to join here today by Mr. Abdul Karim, who is a seasoned branding expert with years of experience helping brands to stay relevant in this fast moving landscape. And he's going to be talking about what I just talked about. So, Mr. Karim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Awesome.
Okay,
Excited to be here. Thank you so much, Karam.
same here, sir. So now we already know the branding is all about connection and building that connection with customers, and obviously, like I mentioned earlier, this whole new era of AI changes, and the way that it's happening or at breakneck speeds is changing everything. There are lots of new
Yes.
digital trends, not just AI, but lots of new digital trends happening all over the world. And this apparently, from the way that us people look at it, is going to change branding, right? And obviously, branding has evolved over the years. So, do you think that this has actually changed the definition of branding? And if it has, how exactly has it evolved, Mr. Green?
Yes. I think that's a great question. I think looking at how, I mean, AI is like on the top of mind of everyone, right? It's like it's changing things at breakneck speed, right? I mean, every day we're hearing updates, change. I mean, from it was simply about content. Now we're talking about moving images, videos. It's just transformative. So for sure, it is changing how we're going to be building brands going forward. But I have two point of views on this. I mean, there are two lenses of how I would look at it. You know, the first one I would say, which is really the core of it, is branding is about connection and always will be, right? It's I think how AI is really putting that to the test, because you could approach this from a very lazy AI perspective, and this is where I think that risk lies. You know what I mean? If because yes, it's the shiny new toy, and everyone wants to adopt it and see where it goes. But I think certain things, yes, are pretty transformative today. From an even application perspective, right? I mean, I can see images. When it comes to social posts or content marketing, for example, if done well, can be really accelerated with AI. Even now I'm seeing on my feed the video evolution, right, of how AI can be creating used to create films, for example, is also getting there. But I think at the end of it, it really comes down to authenticity, and I think the challenge really is, when you adopt all of these in a very fast, not in a perfected way, you just adopt just for the sake of it. I think that's where that risk is. It's people can tell it's not authentic, and as a result of it, I think that's where the challenge lies. So that's one side of it. The other side of it, and I think this is where AI, there's a broader view to AI, in terms of what we're seeing is just this generative content development and whatnot. But I think if we really go a little further, right, AI can transform and is already a lot of areas which are not necessarily what you see in the forefront of things. For example, I think a great example of this is Nike. I don't know, it was not too far ago, I think maybe a year or so, but I think what they did was this was, for something they did with Serena Williams. The whole idea was they used machine learning and AI to pretty much look at every single match and how she played in her form, to really learn everything about her form, and use that knowledge, to sort of track and understand the knowledge to really enhance the performance where when it comes to everything they're doing in the tennis space, right? So now that is using AI to actually transform how products will become better. You know what I mean? So that I think is a use case where really, it becomes exciting. At the same time, what they didn't stop there. They actually went and they actually recreated a match between the 2017 Serena version with the 2022, I believe it was, the 1999 version with the 27. So it was 18-year apart, two AI versions based on that data to create a AI match, right? And it was phenomenal, had like millions of views, but that was authentic, transformative use of AI technology, if that makes sense.
Perfectly makes sense. I mean, that would be a match to watch. I mean, think about. I'm just thinking about the different implications. Thinking of perhaps and I kind of have read about, it, but this would be amazing. Watching Gary Kasparov perhaps play with the best chess grandmasters today. It'd be so amazing to see how the strategies might have evolved, and that's exactly what we were referring to when you said authenticity. Amazing,
Yeah,
amazing, perspectives. So,
yeah.
moving forward. Based on your amazingly extensive global experience, how do you think consumer expectations around these brands, I mean, you talked about Nike and maybe other brands that you definitely would have worked with, have evolved across different regions? Because obviously we got these two layers. We got the brands themselves, consumers changing their minds, and then there's different regions and their specific idiosyncrasies, for lack of a better word. So do you find that the world is truly becoming like a global village, which because of these massive technological advancements, or do you really think that there is this individualism or this individualistic approach that still is prevalent? I mean, it's still present. What's your opinion on that, Mr. Kareem?
Uh, that's another great question, and I think that's something we always think about, right? In terms of how can we approach these different nuances in different markets. I, for one, I would say had the good fortune to work in a lot of global markets, from North America to Middle East, South Asia, even some Far Eastern markets, and so on. And I think what I've realized is when it comes to fundamental needs, right? I think they remain universal. So the desire for connection, joy, security, care, those fundamental needs remain universal across the world. So that's one. The other aspect, but at the same time, there is the role of technology, like you said, right? And that's where I think it's unifying. If anything, it's unifying expectations. You know what I mean? So when you get exposed to certain technologies, right? Let's say on-demand deliveries, for example, like your expectation of speed, ease, or when it comes to digital experiences, the idea of a seamless journey, whether it's online or offline, so those kind of expectations, yes, are getting unified, you know, but at the end of it, regardless of all of this, right, it's culture, that defines expression. And I'll give you an example of it. This was me while working on SC Johnson, and it was in the home cleaning category. So the the opportunity was, I think, got to work on pretty much a whole lot of markets, and I will share two examples which will sort of help you see what I'm seeing from. One is what happened in Nigeria, the other is in Japan, and you'll see how simple both markets, right? The fundamental need is the same, right? Mothers want to create a nurturing, clean environment for their family, right? So that's universal, right? But in Nigeria, when the crazy thing was, I mean, it was a very deep dive research. We got to actually see the homes and how they clean, and it was phenomenal to see the effort the Nigerian mothers go through to clean. I mean, the rituals of cleaning are so intense. They do it so many times, but I think the insight really was because she wanted to achieve a certain level of clean. She had this thing that's called the cocktail. It's a mixture of detergents and a whole bunch of products that she would use to achieve this formula that she had of her own. And here, SC Johnson was trying to bring this all-in-one simple cleaning product. You use it, and it will do your job. And but we realized that she's not going to adopt it, right? Because for her, that effort was her pride. That's where she took pride in, right? That I'm doing all of this because I care. So
Mhm.
what we really did was we translated this idea, and like, it's your method. We've learned from you. You're the inspiration, and then and it's our muscle, and we put it in a product for you to help you clean, so you can clean less, live more, and that was sort of the platform that it drove with. Now, here it is, right? You see Nigeria, you see how effortful the cleaning is done. Now, let's move to Japan. Now in Japan, uh, it's a very unique bathing culture. I mean, first time when people hear it, they're like, "Man, how can I be?" But the idea is that when families, when they take a bath, right, they don't change the water. It's the water is and the bath is the same for the family. So you'd be like, "Man, that sounds very like disgusting, and how is that?" But actually, they have like two sort of cleaning rituals, right? So no one can go into the bath until they have cleaned themselves thoroughly, as a showered themselves. So that's more like a relaxing ritual of how you would just take a bath. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because, again, for the mother, when you do this, the challenge in those markets and in the bathrooms there is the humidity and the mold it creates. It's a very unique mold problem that happens in Japan, unlike anywhere else, right? So they had this product called Cabi Killer. So again, same nurturing need. We had to be like, okay, this is your problem, and this is you have to address it from the roots, and this is a formula created for you to help you get rid of mold in a deep way so that you can provide that nurturing home for yourself. So so I think the point of all of this was really to illustrate, this idea that regardless of all of that unification of technology, of the fundamental needs remaining the same, I think the nuances really come down to cultural habits, and I think, and understanding those really, you cannot bring one product like Cavi Killer. It's irrelevant to a Nigerian market, and you cannot take that formula, Mr. Muscle, to Japan, for example. It just won't work. It's the cultural nuance that makes all the difference.
Interesting. I mean, we've always seen these, memes comparing and saying, Japan lives in a different dimension altogether. But this is, I mean, it's shocking, but it's also very revealing in the sense that we are similar but so different. And it's amazing the way that you just mentioned. I mean, with the example between and the juxtaposition of Nigeria and Japan. At the heart of it, like you said, it still is about cleaning, but the way that you presented it and the way that you were able to understand what they actually want. I mean, and in both cases they want to clean, but it in one case it's about making sure the process in itself is clean. The other one is talking about the environment, because we know that our process is good, but we want the
Yes.
amazing. I mean, being able to pay attention to that, I guess, it makes a lot more sense, like you said earlier, when you said with AI we have to be careful not to be just generating things without being authentic, without being having an understanding of what those cultures want. Interesting, very interesting, Mr. Karim. So my next question is about AI, like you mentioned, this being used as a branding tool. So
Yes.
AI, you kind of talked about it, but I want you to go a little deeper into this. So AI is a disruptor, and like you mentioned in the Serena Williams example, it's also an enabler in branding. Like, for instance, in markets like North America and Europe and Australia and even in the GCC,
Yes.
it has shown itself to be more of a creative power. But do you think that at the same time, it is kind of becoming a threat to what you would call, and you already referred to that idea of brand authenticity? Do you think that is like a conflict that we see happening?
I think the challenge is we're going through a transitionary phase, right? If you recall way back, I remember when the internet came, right?
Mhm.
Students, I think, are a good litmus of this, right? Because suddenly when you used to do your homework, you had to, I don't know if your dad was one of those dads who would get those encyclopedias at home, right? So you had to really go through those. That was like a thing you had to have, right? Because that was your source, that was the only library you would have, and every research you do would have to be limited to that, right? So there was a time, and that took effort, right? And
Mhm.
you had to go. Libraries were not around everywhere, and it was access to knowledge was limited, right? So there was a lot of that effort for certain assignments, right? In history or whatnot, right? But But then internet came and everyone was, and I remember even my sister is like, man, this is not fair. Like she can just simply Google, copy, paste, and it's done, right? So I think we all go through those phases with technology, right? And I think that same thing is happening with AI, and going back to that point that lazy AI use, I think is really with a threat. That you could simply just go, put a prompt, get your answer, and you're happy with it because probably you don't know enough about the topic itself, and that's where it becomes a little dangerous for younger people or people who are still starting their careers and don't have the depth of knowledge of what they're trying to do. So I think because AI will definitely give you answers more than what you know, right? And you would probably, and I see that in my own experience of using it, is that you know it's really a function of how much input you've given. It's almost like genius in, genius out, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if you do not know what you're looking for and you don't have that context in your own mind, then you may not be able to judge and evaluate the quality of what's coming out, and therefore fall in that trap. And yes, then it becomes a threat. But I think if it's, to me, I say it's a 24/7 Ivy League graduate at your fingertips that you can really milk without 24 hours and with no overtime. So I think that's the mindset I feel that you need to look at AI. And if you do use it in that way, then it becomes a partner to you, and it can definitely enhance, accelerate, and even it will really it can be that brainstorming partner to really unlock human creativity for sure. And take it to the next level, even.
So, I mean, relating, to what you just said, and given the fact that AI has been, rapidly improving. I mean, we saw that video of Will Smith. I think it was about 2 years ago, the one where he's eating spaghetti, and it's pretty much what you would call AI slop, right? But now they ran the same video and said that's not Will Smith actually eating it; that's AI generated. So, given the pace with which it's actually improving, do you think that there will ever come a time, or that we should be scared about it or worried about it, or how should we take it, that AI becomes so advanced that it would essentially replace human creativity, like and ingenuity, and for instance, that human insight, that human touch, specifically in branding? What's your take on that?
Personally, I feel, because creativity is so much about lived experiences, emotion, and culture, right? That human aspect is so core to that, and so many aspects of life, that I feel that yes, AI will become very good, but I think there's some aspects of it that will always, require that human touch. I think from a broader perspective, I think the way I look at it is to understand this is like, when, and maybe if you look back, let's say 500 years ago, right, when there was really no faxes, like a horse, ravens were the way to get your messages across, right? And the time it took, right, just to send a simple message, right?
Hmm.
And then with email, everything was like so instant, right? So the fact is, what happened was pace of how we lived kind of transformed, right? Everything became like, if I had to wait for 1 week, if I were to give you a deadline to produce something because I'm waiting 1 week for just your message and your feedback,
Hmm.
and then now if that happens within minutes, then immediately the way I work is changed. So I think the way I see it is AI is like a force multiplier. We haven't probably imagined how it will multiply our output to such a level, and it will actually transform society's output to such a level that it's something we haven't quite imagined what it would be like. So we will be doing things at a very different level, just the way we did with email and internet. We will be living at a different pace of output, and what that looks like is probably still haven't fully realized, right? So that's how I see it. So I don't think it's just going to be a new level of output and creativity and productivity, but yeah, it will enhance output, global output as a whole. So there'll be more for more people, and we'll be doing things at a different scale and level, which, like we said, it's hard to fathom at this stage. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, because if anything, it puts us a lot of us at rest. Not worrying about the fact that we lose our jobs, but we are hoping that it just, like you said, help us make it better. Anyways, very interesting. My
You know,
perspective on that.
I, I just want to add one thing to that.
Yeah,
I
yeah, of
think
course, of course, of course, of course.
this was something. I think just a quote. I think I always say to myself, and I think that just defines it. AI will not take anyone's jobs. I think it's people who master AI who will do that. You know what I mean? So I think really it comes to that. I think it is the way it is. I mean, if I could have been way back and said, I'm not going to embrace the internet, I'm going to do old school things. So I think it's just kind of same. You just got to run with it and learn and master because that's the way it is. So sorry to break you.
No, no, no. It makes perfect sense. I mean, I especially love your perspective on when you said, it is going to take us at a level that we perhaps can't even understand right now. Because a lot of people say, oh no, we'll probably adjust to it, or we're gonna make the best use of it. But I guess that makes a lot more sense that when you compared it to how emails worked. I mean, we never even thought about walking around with devices that'll keep us connected all the time, right? Interesting idea.
Yes.
So connecting that, now the fact that obviously, like I said, with devices that let us be connected all the time, there's this constant struggle, isn't it? I mean, Google had their Google made by Google recently, and their Google I/O in May, and there's always this constant argument every time they come up with something new. They give us better options, they give us these better ways to be interacting with the services, for instance, and so all the other tech giants. They say, oh, we're going to personalize it for you, we're going to make it more specific to you, more specific to what you want, what your experiences are. But at the same time, there's a high price we pay, or so we think that we do, maybe, is that we end up giving some part of our data to them, right? So there's this constant struggle that every one of us has. Should I go more towards more personalization? Should I be happy with that, or should I worry about my privacy? Should I try and find a balance between the two? So more specific to the way that the culture and the norms are in the GCC market, where obviously ethical values are so important. How do you think brands can strike a balance when it comes to this debate about being more personalized, which requires your data, and being more private at the same time? So would love to hear your
Yes.
thought about that.
Yeah, this actually is a global dilemma, right? I think there was a recent Qualtrics study, which sort of, I think, captures this tension really well, And I think the stat really was that about, I think, two-thirds of people want personalization, right? So and you ask them, it's like, yes, if I were to, give you something that's totally customized to you, how would you feel about it? And yes, they appreciate that, right? But
Mhm.
at the same time, I think only about 27% are comfortable with sharing, their data or about, especially if it's captured without their knowledge, so that comfort with, so I want it, but I'm not too comfortable about how you get to that for me. You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
I think this challenge is one that is really across the globe, right? And so no different here. And I would simply say, I think the way to tackle this is, this other researchers also sort of say it, because is like, what do I get out of it? So I think if you bring transparency to how data is captured, and then the value, if people see value in what you are giving, tangible value, and I think the most simplest way, and I think this is why you probably have observed yourself too, is I think the loyalty mechanism, the loyalty cards or loyalty programs are, I think, fundamental to this. Because yes, with Google and all of the Facebook tracking, and it's always been like, this feels very sort of almost like as if they're spying on you. You're
Exactly.
tracking behavior. It's unsolicited, right? I mean, I didn't give them that right. I don't remember giving them that permission, and somehow they've profiled me, right? But on the flip side of it, when I am engaging with a brand on a one-on-one level, right, and they giving me, let's say, rewards for my loyalty, right,
Mm.
I am actually, it's a data mine as a marketer, right? So what happens is, when you give your data, you are getting something in return, and you're giving it because I'm joining a loyalty program. I mean, yes, I may not be as a consumer may not be fully aware of what that means, but whatever it is, just for the reward of it, I'm happy to be part of that program. I think a good example of this, and this is, I think, a little bit older one, but I think Target is kind of been a pioneer of this in terms of the data sciences and really how they track your data. It's just phenomenal, right? Because the whole idea is that they would, because if you use the Target Red Card, right, every time you go to Target, they're looking at your groceries, right? And they can see your patterns over years, right? So imagine holiday season, in the US, for example, Thanksgiving, Christmas, yeah, there's certain behaviors you can see, spring and whatnot, back to school, all of those, right? And they can track and see. So they have a very detailed profile of their customers, right?
Mhm.
And an interesting thing happened because one certain household started receiving, offers, direct mailers, uh, assuming someone was pregnant in the house, you know. Now the parent were surprised, like, what is this? Like, why am I getting this? Especially, why am I getting this? And on discovery, they realize it's because of certain purchases, Target predicted that there's someone who's pregnant in the house. And they didn't know that it was actually their teenage daughter, and her certain purchase patterns triggered that system that alerted and started to give offers related to a pregnant woman, and that's the kind of, I mean, obviously it was one of those very creepy sort of stories of, wow, like how much information Target would have that they could predict something like that just based on your purchase behavior. So that's the kind of that's an extreme example, but I think the insight really is, to answer your question, really is, that if you are creating a program but you're giving something tangible to customers, then I think they're happy to do that. And I think there was, I mean, they're happy to share data, for those offers. And I think loyalty programs are a good way to sort of achieve that on a one-on-one brand level.
So just to, you know, gain from your amazing experience, do you have any like examples with regards to the GCC market? I mean, you did mention about the US, about Target, but how perhaps an example that would help us understand? Because, like you said, something like that happening in a different region would have a very different reaction. Because some
Yes.
people would be okay with it in some regions, but in other regions, perhaps like the GCC, which is relatively more, with different values and different conservative values, they
Yes.
wouldn't be that okay with it. So how do you see a similar scenario where this entire debate could, well, be have more positive spin, especially with the GCC? Would love to hear an example that you might have experienced here in the GCC.
Well, I've not personally been involved in a brand which created a loyalty program. I mean, I had some interaction with brands like 2U who've been trying to do these sort of things.
Hmm.
But I think what I've observed is probably global brands adapting the same principles, like Sephora and Starbucks. Actually, I've seen, it's a controversial brand in this region, but it's one that has adopted, that same. And Starbucks loyalty program is best in class, and what they do. So yes, I think they are using that same principle of, using giving you rewards and then and tracking your behavior. And I don't have data on how much it is. I know there are 40 million Starbucks reward consumers in the US, but I do not know how prevalent it is. What's the adoption like at the moment? But yet, whatever I've seen is basically global brands adopting their programs. Starbucks KSA is a unique program to the market, pretty much mirroring the global one.
Hmm. Interesting. So again, like you mentioned about the amount of data, the data points that they have, the access they have, whether it be our mobile devices, whether it be all the subscriptions that we have, and obviously, all of those marketing partners are so interlinked in a complex web, I would say, that they collect a lot of data. So how do you think, from all of this insight into the consumer behavior and perspectives on things, how can brands leverage all of this data using their marketing tools, to anticipate, not just react to it, but to anticipate, the shift within the consumer, behavior and the shift, especially in the GCC? How do you suggest, or how do you recommend that would be done in the GCC with the data?
Yes. So I would say, there are three sort of tools, I would say, or three lenses of how you can achieve this, right? The first one is kind of what, the primary data, the usage behavior data. I think that's the most fundamental one. And I think if you see around uh, every big corporation around, there's always this talk of digital transformation, right? Digitizing every aspect of the business. And one of that reason is really to be able to tap into. So if you have digitized your entire process, from a back end, front end, whether you are a hypermarket or whether you are, any business, even retail brand, and obviously working with retailers, you could be the Almarai, for example, and you could be able to partner with, retailers and be able to understand how how consumers are buying and behaving. So, so the first and foremost is really this primary source of data. I think that is something. It's just a function of how digitized you are internally and how, and this is where I think systems like why data scientist roles even, and predictive analytics and all of these sort of things are becoming a must have, for large corporations, right? So that you can actually use the data you have, understand it. And I think this is also where AI can help a lot. I think one of the use cases is really, it's very difficult for humans to process a whole lot of this data, right? And this is where I think machine learning and AI can play a big role. And I think a good example of it, and I've seen that here even in Netflix here. But basically, as you know, Netflix is a master of how they personalize and give you recommendations based on your watching behavior, right? To the point that they have this thing called the aesthetic visual analysis. So they, even within the content itself, the thumbnails that you see versus what I see would be very different for the same content, and that is all based on, what your patterns are, or what do you like, the kind of genres you like, and therefore picking scenes and images from based on those preferences to customize your visual, the gallery that you see, not only in terms of what is recommended to you, but the thumbnails that you see, and that's the kind of, and that is only possible because they are using their own internal data, analyzing it, and doing that. So the learning again from a GCC perspective is that same, as you digitize more and more of your business and track and build this capability would be a key to really, being able to use data to understand your customers and therefore engage with them. So that's one. The other two aspects, which sort of complement, but I think this is really the core for me. But the other ones are marketing data. So users data is primary that you have in house. The marketing data, as you know, is, yes, it's a little bit of, it goes into a little bit of that gray area. But I think as platforms, certain because now we've sort of evolving, right, from the same way it used to be TV media. Now it's all social channels, right? They are the big channels, and it's not even all organic, right? It's all paid. So as you really build and connect with platforms, let's say like Snapchat or Instagram, they have a whole lot of their analytics, where you can understand what kind of content works, and understand users' behavior, and and what are people clicking on, and so on, and using third-party tools even to understand what's trending and whatnot, and therefore customizing your. So those channels again exist. They're used in a big way. Snapchat, KSA is one of the bigger markets in terms of how much Snapchat is used. We know that about YouTube as well, right? So a lot of these channels are being used now in this region in a big way, and therefore gives an opportunity for marketers to use them to understand that. And there's a third one which is syndicated, but yeah, I'll just pause here just so uh,
Okay.
to.
So
I don't know if
that
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 makes
doesn't
sense.
make sense. But then, Mr. Karim, I also think about the fact you said Netflix, you said Snapchat itself, YouTube itself. Now, obviously, these are giants, and having access to a lot of user data, and we're talking billions of just Android users
Yes.
alone, let alone the iPhone
Yes.
users. And the question that usually pops in my head is like, how could somebody like me, perhaps, if I were to start up a small company, or if I was even working for a smaller retail store, how exactly would I be able to tap into this amazing network of marketing insights without that gigantic budget that's the price tag? So how do I do that?
Yes.
I mean, if I do it with a lower budget, how do I do it with a lower budget? Can I pull it off? Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a great question. During one of my times in the U.S., I got affiliated with a startup, uh, and it got into a close relationship, and we got to that whole sort of funding journey. How can we, engage venture capitalists, and part of that, there was this program. I think it was something that worked up with founders and co-founders. It was the George Mason University program, I think, in Washington, and they did this whole sort of workshop, and it was kind of like a work with, they would have experts, venture capitalist experts on the panel, and then they sort of coached you through the whole process of what are you supposed to do, build your business plan and whatnot, right? And one of their things was something that they made you do, right? And you probably have heard that terminology, right? ICP, or ideal customer profile, right? Like, you have to, as a startup, be very wet. Who is it that you're really going after, right? And as part of that process, what they would encourage you to do, and this was a retail on-demand delivery startup, so it was like, okay, you need to go out there, talk. They like, okay, here's a questionnaire. You go there, just go to a store, try to find their owners, engage them, introduce yourself, tell them who you are, blah blah blah, and then do all of that. So the sum of it all really meant was, it is, you just simply go out there, talk to 10, 20 people of your ICPs, potential ICPs, and really get those insights in terms of what they look for, how can you, and if you're an existing business, you already have a relationship, and then you could engage through, loyalty based or reward based, incentive based surveys, or even if you want to go further, you can actually host, if you're, let's say, a coffee shop brand, you could have a day of free coffee for a bunch of your customers, get them together, have a chat, and talk to them and whatnot. Bottom line, I think it just comes down to, if you can't do these big things, just simply going out there and talking to your audiences as a small business will unlock so much insight. Like, one of the things we learned was, like, that a lot of those shop owners were actually from different countries, and like, Koreans and Chinese, these ethnic stores, and Arabs, and they didn't, some of them didn't even speak English very well, or Mexicans, that's like a big segment, right, in the US, right? So then we realized that the need for a language multilingual app would be crucial from the storefront side, because here you're creating this, you thinking US and English and whatnot, and then there's a whole audience of these different languages that are not, they're just going to completely ignore you, for example. So that kind of thing. So, does that make sense? I mean, I think that
It does.
primary research.
I was just, harkening back to what you said earlier. You said brand authenticity. I mean, this is just basically, you got to be the grunt and go old school down into the trenches. You got to go meet your, as you said, the ICP. You need to go meet your customer and talk to them. It's just amazing. I mean, and literally talk to them. We're not just saying figuratively talk to them. Literally talk to them to get
Yes.
what we really want. Amazingly, I mean, it's just amazing how even despite having AI and having so many insights, at the end of the day, you got to go talk to your customers. So I would love to, you've talked a lot about what they should be doing. What I would love to understand, especially with regards to Saudi Arabia, and because obviously not only does it have so many different communities and so many different people from different places with different experiences, but there in itself, it's a different kind of a culture. That's what happens with any heterogeneous community. But there are a lot of common mistakes that you might have seen or you believe that global brands might make, especially when they're trying to connect with the Saudi Arabian consumers. Which ones do you think that they should definitely be avoiding? Or maybe you could quote some examples. Would love to hear those, where they might have made those mistakes that they shouldn't, that perhaps brands in the future definitely shouldn't when they're entering the Saudi Arabian market. Yes, please.
Yes. Yeah, this is actually a challenge even today I face with some of my clients here in Saudi, and I mean, so if I were to start from someone who's completely not ever worked here or done anything, right, for a business who's trying to engage, I think the biggest stereotypical sort of mistake that often tends to be made is I think a lot of people don't truly understand. If you've not been to Saudi, you cannot truly understand what Saudi is like, for example, very specifically. And I think probably it applies to pretty much every country, right? You always see certain images, but I think maybe because of the history of Saudi being kind of a little bit of a closed society, it didn't really present itself in terms of what really it was for whatever historic reasons, right? And so therefore, I think that a lot of those oversimplified, stereotypical images sort of exist, right? So I think people will still talk about, those desert, camel, oil. Everyone's either very rich, or they would just think, there's probably no infrastructure in some level and some point, so there's these really these crazy stereotypes sort of out there, right? So I think that's probably the very first lens of people who've completely had no exposure whatsoever, and this could be, a brand. It could be, let's say, a local burger brand in the U.S. looking Saudi may not think, okay, Dubai is the way to go because of this perception, for example. The other aspect, I think, the second lens of it, once you get past this, that okay, no, this is not what it is, is the the understanding the family, the social dynamics. I think it takes a little while to understand it, and I was thinking about it now because I've had the opportunity to live, work in Saudi and then US, and now sort of come back here for something, and I realized that that it there's certain habits, right? A certain way of living that determines what do you do and behave. Like, for example, just I was just like, why is, like in the US, are pretty much most places for dinner would be closed by 9 p.m., and the only ones that would be open outside of the fast food ones are ones that serve alcohol. And then I sort of realized that, because of the way society is and the role of alcohol and how everything sort of centers around that in terms of your late evenings, and therefore only places that you would see congregation happening is really places that serve alcohol, and that's where society and social engagement happens. Now, contrast that to Saudi, and I was like, why is it that 1 a.m. is very normal? You would find places to eat are all open and people are eating. And that's when I was like, when you remove a certain behavior from society, the way people spend their evenings, and so from coffee shops to dessert shops to eating out to the whole dynamic of society is sort of completely transformed just by this removing this one aspect. And therefore, because they're just not going to where what an American would go to, they're going to what would do when you don't do that. And understanding those nuances of how, as a result of that, and then going further, like these habits into family dynamics and the role of families, and so on. But I think, but the core of it, I think the biggest thing for me personally, and I think this is again part of how Saudi has been, like, as you would know, is in marketing historically, like it's always been expats, right? A lot of leading roles in across organizations, it's always been expats, right? So I think because of that, and there's a deeper conversation to that, right? In terms of the education system, the way locals have been, and global brands and how they've come and whatnot. But the sum of it is basically there hasn't been enough local talent, which has changed significantly now. But as a result of that, I think the one thing that, as a strategist, for example, if I'm thinking about a brand, you can't, even if I were to get the insight, get the understanding, but that local Arabic first thinking, just the aspect of language, which I realize is almost like, I don't know if I could say, like Iqbal. If you were to take Iqbal's poetry, right, and if you were to translate it into English, I mean, it just will not, it will just completely be butchered, right? So, so I think the aspect of language is something which is very undermined. I think the power of language, and as I'm working here, even the regional language aspects. It's like certain aspects are so regional specific, even in Saudi, that even someone from the north may not understand something that's said in Najd or Hijaz. So those sort of nuances, that Arabic first thinking, that localization is just something a lot of brands miss. And I think even to this day, for me, it's a challenge of how do I bring Arabic first storytelling as an outsider, as an expat.
Hmm. Interesting. So obviously now that complicates things even more so, considering that there's this, we obviously know of how Saudi Arabia is completely changing. There's the Vision 2030, and obviously that's going to change a lot more things. Now, couple that with the fact that traditional marketing strategies, they do apply. Obviously, in some cases, those basic tenets are still going to be around, but a lot of it is staying changing because consumers can now just switch from one brand to another far more quickly. So, what strategies do you recommend and suggest that brands would actually focus on to have more of a lasting impact, especially in the context of the Vision 2030 for Saudi Arabia?
Yes, I think Vision 2030 is created an interesting tension, I think, from a local standpoint. And I think this is something when you start working, you pretty much can sort of see. Uh, but I think what it is really doing is there is a lot of people were thinking, that, okay, Saudi has transformed. It was fundamentally a closed society. Now suddenly it's become an open society and whatnot, right? But I think when you really dig into it and you really see, I think what's happened is people have simply embraced who they are now. I think so. Whatever my values are, I could be whoever I am, right? I could be having a very modern point of view, I have a very balanced point of view, I have a very conservative point of view. Whoever it is, I can be true to that, you know. And I think the challenge is balancing some of that, because the suddenly now there are dual roles, women are working, so sort of those challenges that you would expect in some of those Western markets, right? When there's both, the men and women both are working in a household, and the challenge it brings as a result of that, so how do you balance those traditional roles and those monetary roles? So I think that is one of the core challenges of this change, and I think any brand that embraces and understands and helps resolve that tension, like helps them embrace that modernity, right, still being true to who they are, because at the core of it, not majority want to preserve the core of who they are, and I think it's just about how you navigate the modernity in the context of preserving their true cultural spirit, so so that's really what it comes down to from a broader perspective. uh, I don't know if that was the question. Was there another
No,
angle to
no,
this?
that actually does help us understand quite a bit. But what I would love to hear you about is when you talked about earlier, you talked about how brand loyalty can actually be built and it can be strengthened with essentially rewards programs. Now we understand and everybody knows there's nothing better than getting something out of the brand. I mean, something
Yes.
tangible. But do you think, given the
Yes.
fact that these consumer behaviors are changing, that it is perhaps now, in your opinion, making more sense to have this emotional connection between the brand and the consumer? Or is it still something that can be built, this loyalty can be built better with just rewards programs? So do you think emotional connections are more important or are becoming more important given the context that people can switch more easily? What do you think about that?
Yes. Okay, I'll answer this with two lenses, right? The first, just a little context to set is, I think the idea that loyalty is something that brands do like people embrace. I mean, like what you see is like data on loyalty, right? If you look at it across generations, so
Mhm.
learning is obviously younger people tend to be a little less loyal especially Gen Z. But the different numbers are not very stark, like so some global studies, Gen Z is, let's say, 66%, so millennials will be 73%, So yeah, they'll be a little bit more loyal, they'll be a little less loyal, but I think the bigger insight is, so they're also switching, so the switching rates are also very high among younger people. So what does this mean, and what does it mean for brands? So I think the core of it, if you really get down to, is, to your point, it is about purely that, yeah, you've got to, like, customer experience is the foundation. I
Mhm.
mean, if you've got to wow me, I gotta have wow experience with your product, with whatever that I am doing, whether it's the car brand that I buy, or a Sephora, or a local Abaya, or whatever product that I may be buying, right? The key is, it's the foundation of it is the customer experience. If I am having a wow experience, then the best ad, they say, is a good product, right? So no loyalty scheme will fix a subpar customer experience, so I know I keep going back to the Starbucks example, right? But the idea is that, if you really think about it, it's not the best coffee in the world. It's 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 consistent and reliable. So what they've done is, they have a foundation of a pretty, if not superior, but a pretty trustworthy, decent quality experience, which is probably maybe above, maybe a lot of those mainstream brands, right? So it's a little bit on that premium, but gives you that consistency. And I think why I'm mentioning that is because their loyalty program, if you look at some of the data points there, right, they have 40 million customers, and around 50% of the repeat business comes from their from the Starbucks reward users. And similar things you can see from Sephora as well. Like, I think about that 30 million base, 80% of their business comes from these Sephora insiders, right? So learning is, right, because they've, both brands, why I mention is that they've delivered a customer experience which is, which delivers at a par, above par, So people love that experience. So, and then as a result of that, loyalty program, it just becomes the layer that you add, to monetize that relationship. So in the end, it's not about a transaction. Loyalty, it's about the relationship first. And once you have that relationship, I'm happy to engage with you even more, because now you're giving me rewards for that. And therefore, that explains that, the dichotomy, between that loyalty. Yes, there is loyalty, but there's switching as well. So why is that? So yes, I'm exploring new things, but the moment I feel like you've engaged me, you give me something I truly appreciate and want, then I am going to be loyal to you, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. So obviously, there's a lot that you've just unpacked. So, and you did mention that you've worked a lot in the U.S. market, so North America, but yeah, the U.S. market specifically. And given your vast experience, what do you suggest? What would you advise marketeers, especially in Saudi Arabia, how they could perhaps make their marketing and their branding strategies more future proof? Especially with the whole AI thing, while at the same
Yes.
time, handling the cultural nuances. What would you tell the marketeers, the brand consultants, strategists like yourselves, advertisers, or perhaps even a small business starting themselves up? What would you say, given the experience you've had in North America and Europe and elsewhere? What would they take care of? What should they be preparing for when they're doing things in Saudi Arabia, please?
Yes. I think the first and foremost thing, and I think this was where, even because when I gave you the examples of, let's say, Japan, Nigeria, we did certain things for the holiday season when we were doing it for the UK market. And I think the key always is that, I think, local nuances. I think they're never really there. Yes, like we talked about, the broader trends, fundamental needs are human, but I think those cultural expressions, especially when the layer of language sort of comes into it, I think complicates things. So the first and foremost lesson, and I think this is something I'm actively doing myself, like we talked about, this Arabic first storytelling, right? To be really able to do that, yes, maybe you may not have the right, let's say, backgrounds, like strategists may not have 2 decades of experience that are Arabic first thinkers, but I think that's where people like myself find young talent, to partner and nurture them to get those insights, to help them think Arabic first and help me get to where I need to get to for my clients as a result, right? So I think that's the first and foremost thing, because that I've seen again, even non-Saudis, for example, sometimes are just not able to get those nuances. Even they speak Arabic languages. A lot of Lebanese in the industry, and Jordanians, and a lot of non-Saudis. And it just the dialects that even speaking the same language don't get those nuances. So I think that is the first and foremost lesson. The second thing I think is those like it's sort of a step two, but I think those that primary research angle, the cultural understanding, that openness, like they say, a desk is a very dangerous place to do marketing from, so really getting into those things. So I mean, uh, way back for a Unilever, ex-Unilever client, excuse me, we had done this, right? It was like there's this culture, I think it's called Ithneania. I don't know if I'm butchering the word, but basically the idea is that, there is this, in the Saudi context, there is this habit of congregating with your friends. They think that they call this Ithneania, or the whole idea is that it's so important. Like, you set certain dates with a certain group of people,
Mhm.
that if you say, if my sister is getting married that day, then I will miss that wedding, but I won't miss that gathering. So it's like one of those ritualistic things that people do right now. Why it's important is because when we were doing this, we actually had someone in that group engage with locals, and he was a researcher, but he was helping us, really have a dialogue, because they were talking about different topics, and then to get insights on. So the idea being, how do you really get local? How do you really get local and get those insights? So I think that cultural openness, understanding how the social dynamics work and how you can plug in to get those insights, because what would work in a one market may not work even from gathering those insights. So I think that's the second thing. And then the third part I would simply say, and this is I think a broader learning, is like I talked about, is AI, right? Mastering AI. I think
Mhm.
uh, this is it's the future of how we'll do everything, just the way the internet was, and so many other technologies. And I think for anyone, I think getting that technological fluency. And I think the challenge also, specifically in this market, is because a lot of these learning models, the training is based on, obviously more Western sources of data, right? So I think the feeding may not have happened from a very local. There may be not enough training done on local data, and I think that's where there may be a little bit of a limitation. But I think going forward, as probably is an opportunity, like, we have Chinese DeepSeek, maybe there's one that could be very Arabic first AI model that is
Mhm.
trained on AI, local data and whatnot. So yeah, but generally, regardless of that, I think mastering AI would be key. So yeah, so this is what I would say. I mean, we can go on a little bit more. I don't know if we have more time on it, but I think, yeah, this is for, I mean, if anything, one last thing I probably would say is, and I think this is applies, the principle of all of this, at least as a consultant, as a marketer, as a strategist, is I think comes down to rigor. I think
Mhm.
research, everything I talked about is a function of rigor, right? Like how much rigor you bring in terms of who you work with locally, the research you do, the effort you bring, how you push AI to the max. It's like milk it to really get to where you need to get to. It really comes down to that. I think the more rigor you do, because I think they say ideas is nothing new. There's no new idea. There's just simply existing elements, that you find a new connection with, is simply an idea. So the more richer the pool you play with, right, the more likely you are to come up with a creative idea, because now you are the elements that you're connecting are so much broader, because you have such a rich pool of insight and data and understanding available.
Interesting. So again, something that always I think about. I mean, yes, you did mention how we could get more insights and more research, even with the large language models, with these AI tools. They would have data, but that's very Western. Makes a lot more sense. Maybe starting with something like you said, DeepSeek, because it's more raw, or perhaps it's not. I wouldn't use the word, and probably more biased towards the more Western data. But the question that I always think of is like, should we play it safe all the time and just go with the research, or should we, give it a shot, just throw the odd ball out there, be more creative, be spontaneous. I mean, obviously, with making sure that you understand the nuance of the market, of the Saudi Arabian market, or of the GCC market as a whole. But do you think that there should always be, this kind of like balance, or perhaps, sometimes we should lean more towards the side of less caution with research and just, try and be a little more creative? Because if we just, I mean, it makes me wonder if we just keep on going with just what we have, the data, and play it safe, what if we become lost in the crowd? So what's your take on the whole research versus creativity when it comes to marketing strategies?
Yes, I think that's a very great question. I think what I would say is, I think if it's a little bit maybe a process thing, but the way I look at it, right, is everything you do is a function of two leaps. One is a strategic leap, and then the other is a creative leap. So why I think the first one is kind of, it's almost like when you're looking at a vast array of land and you do not know where to dig, right? So I think the path of strategy is to tell you, okay, this is the path. At the end of the tunnel is where you will find gold, right? So I think that is what all of what I was talking about is helping you do, right? So you've understood the path. So what I'm also doing is telling you where not to go. So I think where not to go is I've covered those avoid those stereotypes, understand, I've done the local nuances, you know what I mean? I've done the rigor, I've done it. Now I've given you the path. So now from there, that's where the creative leap happens. And I think once you know that this is your North Star, then I think the freedom, and this is why you say great briefs and the strategies really are giving the freedom to do exactly what you just said, to take those creative leaps. But because now you're playing in a certain space, you know that yes, at the end of it, you're going to hit gold, right? Because now how you do that how is up to you. And I think that's where creativity can shine, and we can take risks and do something unexpected.
Amazing. I would love to go on, Mr. Kareem, because this is an amazing discussion here. So I am really grateful, right, on behalf of the AMC Insights here, for sharing such amazingly valuable insights for not just branding and not just the strategy and the nuances that we have to adapt to in the GCC, but also of how AI is going to change it, and for helping us put to rest the worry that with AI coming in, we'd be out of jobs. Talking about how AI has, still needs us, and we kind of need to adopt it at the same time to move forward. So thank you so much for all of that. And I'm sure we would love to hear more about your experiences in the different parts of the world that you've had with marketing strategies and all. For our viewers, we would definitely summarize this by saying, and from what I and correct me if I'm wrong in any of your of summarizing what you just said, Mr. Kareem, is that we need to embrace the future of branding, and it belongs to people who understand that you still have to stay rooted in what has already been established. You still got to go down into the trenches and talk to your consumers, but at the same time you need to start collecting data and start looking at insights, start looking at the fancy words that you see everywhere, which is AI, large language models, and data insights and data analytics. So to ensure that you are not just personalizing, not just emotionally connecting, but also still being authentic, while making sure, like Mr. Kareem said, for instance, in the KSA market alone, be Arabic first, which is understanding the nuances of that market. Thank you so much again, Mr. Kareem. And at AMC, we're always committed to making sure that the GCC and the European markets navigate these challenges and the ones coming in the future, and that they understand that this is done through a deeper understanding of research driven and data driven insights and strategies. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And do not forget to subscribe to our podcast for more conversations with amazing individuals like Mr. Kareem here and other industry leaders who are shaping the future of marketing and branding. This is me, Khurram, signing off. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the amazing conversation. Loved it.